All right, let's dive into this, huh? Renting in England. We've got this Guardian article, right? And it's, it paints a pretty bleak picture, to be honest, but we've also got this Reddit thread. So many voices chiming in there. Should be interesting to see what they have to say.
Yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it? You've got the hard data from the article, and then all these personal experiences from the Redditors. It's like two sides of the same coin.
Definitely. And speaking of the article, they don't mess around. Right off the bat, they hit us with this statistic. Almost two-thirds, get this, almost two-thirds of working private renters in England, they're struggling to pay their rent.
Yeah, that's a huge number. Really underscores how serious this housing affordability crisis is. And you have to think about the impact, right? Not just on individuals. This ripples through the whole economy. I mean, when people can't afford basic living expenses, that affects everything. Productivity, spending, it can even stifle economic growth.
Absolutely. And that's where the Reddit thread gets, well, kind of wild. You see people talking about how, get this, it's sometimes cheaper to pay a mortgage than it is to rent the same place. Like, one person said their mortgage is £500 a month, but a similar flat nearby rents for £900. How is that even possible?
Well, it comes down to the fundamentals of owning versus renting, doesn't it? With a mortgage, you're chipping away at that loan, building up equity over time. And those payments, they tend to stay relatively stable. But with rent, all you're paying for is the right to live there. You're not building any ownership. And on top of that, those rent payments, they just keep going up year after year, often outpacing wages too, especially in areas where property values have just gone through the roof.
It's like landlords are on this escalator, right? Going up and up with those rising property values. While the renters, they're stuck on a treadmill, just running and running, costs going up and up. No wonder people are frustrated. And speaking of landlords, the Reddit thread, oh man, it had some opinions from landlords, let me tell you. Some sounded pretty genuine, concerned about the situation, frustrated with the system even, talking about rising interest rates, higher property taxes, and how it's eating into their profits.
Right.
But then you had others, well, let's just say they weren't quite as understanding. Some were bragging about banning people from online forums for daring to disagree with them.
Yeah, that range of views is interesting, though, because it really shows how complicated all of this is. On the one hand, you've got landlords who are struggling themselves, genuinely trying to make ends meet, and also trying to provide decent housing at a price that people can afford. They're caught in the middle. Rising mortgage rates, constant need for repairs, tenants who, well, they're understandably pushing for lower rents. It's a tough spot to be in.
It is.
But then, on the other side, you've got landlords who, it seems like profit comes first no matter what. They see this market and they just see dollar signs, a chance to jack up rents, even if it means some renters are going to be pushed into real financial hardship.
Yeah. It's a tough situation all around, and it definitely contributes to that feeling of a housing affordability crisis, which is everywhere in that Reddit thread. People are just priced out. Renters, potential buyers, it doesn't matter. They're sharing these stories of having to make impossible choices, like paying rent or putting food on the table. Giving up on owning a home because saving for a deposit, forget about it. It's a grim picture.
It is, and it's important to remember, these aren't just numbers on a spreadsheet. These are real people facing incredibly difficult choices, compromising their quality of life. When so much of your income goes towards just keeping a roof over your head, it impacts everything. Saving for the future, investing in education, even just going out every now and then, it all adds up.
It really does. And it brings us to this term, it kept popping up in the Reddit thread, rent extractors. It was used to describe, well, basically people or companies that are profiting from owning essential assets like housing, but without really adding any value themselves. And there was a lot of anger directed at these rent extractors, this idea that they're profiting off of a basic human need.
It's a crucial point, isn't it?
Yeah.
It makes you question the whole role of housing in society. I mean, should it be treated like any other commodity, just subject to the whims of the market? Or should it be considered a fundamental right, something that everyone deserves to have access to?
Yeah.
This whole rent extractor argument, it reflects that growing feeling that the way things are set up now, it favors those who already own assets.
Yeah.
While those who rely on renting, they're becoming more and more vulnerable.
It's like, should your ability to have a roof over your head be decided by how much you can pay, regardless of whether that payment is actually improving anything, the property, the community? It's a question that really gets to the core of this whole issue. And speaking of strong feelings, this anger towards rent extractors, it led to some pretty radical suggestions in the Reddit thread. One person even brought up a mass rent strike, the idea being if enough private renters refused to pay, it would force the government to finally do something, regulate the market.
That would certainly be a bold move and definitely cause some disruption. I mean, the success of a rent strike really depends on widespread participation and having very clear demands. If enough renters withhold rent, it could put immense pressure on landlords, potentially forcing them to negotiate, maybe even sell their properties. But we have to acknowledge the potential downsides too. Legal ramifications, unintended consequences for the market as a whole. It's a high-stakes game.
Definitely. And while we're on the topic of, well, sensitive subjects, there's a pretty heated debate in that thread about immigration. Some users they're blaming immigration for the housing crisis, saying that more people coming in, it just puts more strain on the already limited housing supply. Others are pushing back, though, saying that oversimplifies things, that it ignores all the other contributing factors.
The impact of immigration on housing is complex, and it often gets oversimplified. We have to approach this carefully. Look at the facts. I mean, it's true. Population growth can put pressure on housing. But to say immigration is the sole cause of this crisis, that ignores so much, like the lack of new homes being built, government policies that haven't kept up, and the fact that housing is increasingly seen as a financial investment rather than a place for people to live.
Yeah, so it's not as straightforward as more people equals higher rents. There's a whole web of factors at play, which is why this conversation is so important. We need to understand all these nuances if we're going to find solutions that actually work.
Absolutely. That's what makes diving into these sources so fascinating. You start to see the complexity. You peel back those layers and you see just how complicated it really is.
It's like you can't just say, oh, more people, that means higher rents. It's way more than that.
Exactly.
Which, well, it makes me wonder, what's next for renters in England? Is there any hope for them to find a decent, affordable place to live without this constant worry of being priced out?
That's the big question, isn't it? And in that Reddit thread, there were some interesting ideas being thrown around, some practical policy changes. Others, well, they were a bit more radical, I guess you could say.
Like what?
Well, someone suggested stricter rules for landlords. Things like setting a maximum time for them to respond to repair requests.
Yeah.
Or penalties for neglecting properties.
Okay, yeah.
Another idea was to cap rent increases, like tying them to inflation or wage growth, so they don't just keep spiraling out of control.
Right. Makes sense.
And then there was the idea of building way more social housing, to offer a more affordable option compared to the private market.
Yeah, it sounds like there are options out there, but there's also just this frustration, A lot of those Redditors, they seem pretty disillusioned with the whole political landscape. Like neither party really cares about renters.
That's understandable. I mean, given the scale of the crisis and the fact that there aren't a lot of concrete solutions coming from those in power, it's crucial for the government to step up, really prioritize policies that make renting more affordable, more stable, and just fairer.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, it's not about bricks and mortar. It's about people's lives.
Exactly. To be fair, though, the Guardian article did mention some things the government is trying to do. They talked about Labor's promise to build 1.5 million homes if they get elected, and the possibility of more investment in social housing.
Right. Those are definitely positive steps. But as always, the details matter. How are they going to build all these homes? Where are they going to be located? Will they actually be affordable for the people who need them the most? And even with more investment in social housing, the question is, can they build enough to meet the demand? It's a bit like trying to fill a leaky bucket.
It really is. Reading through all those comments, those Reddit comments, it really hit me. Just the emotional toll this housing situation is taking on people. It's not just about the money. It's about the stress, the anxiety, the feeling of being, I don't know, trapped in a system that's working against you. People are making these huge life decisions based on where they can afford to live, sacrificing careers, relationships, even their mental health.
Yeah, that's a crucial point. We can't just think about this as an economic issue. It's a social and humanitarian issue, too.
Yeah.
When you don't have secure housing, it undermines everything. Your stability, your sense of belonging, your ability to just thrive.
So after this deep dive into the lives of English renters, what are the main things we should be thinking about?
Well, I'd say there are three key takeaways. First, this housing crisis is real. It's affecting a lot of people, and it's serious. It's not just a problem for low-income earners. It's affecting working professionals, families, people across all income levels. Second, there's no easy fix. It's going to take a multifaceted approach. Government intervention, responsible landlords, and maybe even a fundamental shift in how we as a society view housing.
Yeah, it sounds like we need to have a serious conversation about whether the current system is it even working? Is housing a commodity or a right? And who benefits from the way things are now?
Exactly. That's the kind of critical thinking we need. And it brings us to the third takeaway. This isn't about numbers, it's about real people facing real challenges. Any solution has to address not only the economics, but the human cost of this crisis. We need to think about solutions that are equitable, sustainable, and that actually make people's lives better.
And maybe that means being open to, well, maybe some really radical ideas, ideas that challenge how things are done now and force us to imagine what's possible.
Exactly. We need to think outside the box,
Yeah.
be willing to explore new solutions, even those that seem unconventional at first. This housing crisis is complex, but I think if we have open, honest, and creative conversations, we can find solutions that work for everyone, not just a select few.
I like that. Radical solutions. It goes back to what we've been talking about. Is the current system even sustainable long term?
That's a great question. And the Reddit thread, while it focuses on the immediate issues, it does hint at the need for a bigger systemic change.
It's almost like we need to rethink our whole relationship with housing.
Exactly, and that brings us to something really interesting. It wasn't fully explored in the Reddit thread, but you touched on it earlier. What if we started thinking about totally different housing models?
Okay, now you've got me intrigued. We've been talking about how the current system seems to be failing a lot of people. So what are the alternatives? What other ways of doing things could create a fairer and more sustainable future for everyone?
That's where it gets really interesting. Are there models of collective ownership, cooperative housing, or community land trusts that could make housing more equitable? Are there ways to encourage the construction of affordable housing that benefits more than just developers? These are questions worth exploring. They challenge the assumptions we make about the current system and force us to imagine a future where housing isn't just about profit, but about people.
It's like opening up this whole new world of possibilities. Instead of just trying to fix a system that might be broken, what if we design something entirely new, something that actually works for the people it's supposed to serve?
It's a powerful idea. It requires us to shift our perspective. Instead of asking, how do we fix the current system? We ask, what kind of housing system do we want to create?
It's like we have a blank canvas and we get to choose what to paint.
Precisely. And that's what makes these deep dives so rewarding. They push us to think differently, question our assumptions, and imagine new possibilities.
And who knows, maybe that's where the real solutions are. Not in fixing a broken system, but in creating something entirely new, something better.
That's the beauty of exploring ideas. You never know where they might lead.
Well, on that note of possibility, and maybe even a little bit of hope, I think it's time to wrap things up for this part. We've covered a lot today, haven't we? The statistics, the worries, the bold ideas, it's all there in the English rental market. But it's clear this goes beyond just numbers.
It's a human story. A story of struggle, resilience, and the search for solutions. And it's a story that's still being written.
And at the end of the day, it's up to all of us to decide how this story ends. A future where housing provides security and opportunity, or one where it's a battleground of inequality and exploitation.
We have the power to choose a different path, a path that leads to a more just and equitable housing system for everyone.
And that's a powerful thought to leave our listeners with as we wrap up this deep dive into renting in England. We encourage you to keep thinking, keep asking questions, and keep the conversation going. It's more than just, understanding what renting in England is like right now. It's about having this bigger conversation about what we value, right? And
Okay.
how to create a future where everyone has a home.
Yeah, it's about questioning those really ingrained ideas we have about property, ownership, and the role of government.
Yeah.
It's asking ourselves, what if we're doing it all wrong?
What if we've been looking at this whole thing the wrong way this whole time? What if, instead of trying to fix a system that's just broken, we just start over, design something completely new that actually gets to the root of the problem?
That's the power of deep dives like this.
Yeah.
They let us break free from conventional thinking and explore new possibilities. It's about shifting the conversation. Instead of how do we fix what's broken, we start asking, what kind of future do we want?
And that future might mean, rethinking some pretty basic ideas. If having a home is truly a basic human need, should it be treated like something you buy and sell, subject to the ups and downs of the market? Or should it be a shared responsibility, something we all work together to make sure everyone has?
Those are big questions, and there aren't any easy answers. But by talking openly and honestly, being willing to challenge our own assumptions, considering different points of view, well, maybe we can start to build a future that's fairer, more sustainable for everyone.
So as we finish up this exploration of renting in England, we want to leave you with this. Don't just accept things the way they are. Don't be afraid to ask tough questions, Imagine radical solutions and demand a better future for yourself, for your community.
The housing crisis it's a complex problem, but it's not impossible to solve. By working together, embracing innovation, and never forgetting the human impact, I think we can create a world where everyone has a safe, affordable, and secure place to call home.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We hope it's given you some new insights, maybe even inspired you to take action.
And remember, this isn't the end of the conversation. Keep exploring, keep questioning, keep pushing for a better future.